He helped an orc girl. Then she asked for marriage. The orc girl was dying in his trap. Not a beast, not a raider, not some nameless creature from the dark. A real orc woman, huge, wounded, and dressed in torn black armor stained with blood. One leg was caught between the iron jaws he had set for wolves, and 3 arrows were already buried in her side. She had clearly been running from something long before she reached his forest. Then he saw the mark on her shoulder. Even under the mud and blood it was there. A war clan crest stamped into her armor in silver. Not common metal, not common rank. Whoever she was, men had killed to stand near that symbol. The human froze for half a breath. Then the dogs in the distance started barking. Riders, coming fast. The orc girl forced herself up, grabbed a broken spear, and pointed it straight at his throat with a shaking hand. Her eyes were full of pain, fury, and warning. "Help me," she said, voice rough with blood, "or leave before they see you." He should have run. Instead, he stepped closer, and the sound of horses stopped right outside the trees. He moved. Before fear could stop him, the human snapped the trap open with both hands and a grunt of pain in his shoulders. The orc girl nearly drove the broken spear into his face anyway, but the moment her leg came free, she collapsed hard into the wet leaves. The riders were close now. He could hear harness chains, low voices, the sharp snort of horses catching. "Scent. Can you walk?" he whispered. She tried to push herself up. Failed. Blood ran down her side and darkened the ground beneath her. That was answer enough. He threw her arm over his shoulders and almost buckled under her weight. She was taller, broader, heavier than any person he had ever carried. But panic gave him strength. He dragged her through the trees, off the hunting path, across a narrow stream, and toward the small hut where he lived alone at the edge of the forest. His home was barely more than one room with a lean-to shed, a low bed, a crooked table, and shelves made from rough-cut planks. Everything inside had been repaired more than once. The roof leaked in one corner. The window was covered with oiled cloth instead of glass. A single pot hung over the hearth. It was the kind of place no one envied and no one visited unless they needed something cheap fixed, and now a wounded orc warrior was lying on his bed like a fallen queen. The contrast was almost absurd. Her armor, even broken, was better made than anything in his house. The rings on her braces were engraved. The leather straps were dyed in colors too deep and rich for common soldiers. Even the knife at her hip had a carved bone hilt. This was no ordinary fighter who had gotten lost in the woods. She woke when he tried to cut the arrow from her side. Her hand shot to his throat so fast he barely saw it move. "If you touch me wrong," she said through clenched teeth, "I will kill you in your own house." He swallowed, keeping his hand steady even as his pulse pounded. "If I don't touch the wound, you'll die in it." For a long second, neither moved. Then her grip loosened. He cleaned the blood with boiled water, tore one of his only good shirts into strips, and worked in silence while she watched him with the hard, suspicious stare of someone used to command, not mercy. She did not cry out once. That frightened him more than screaming would have. Night settled outside. The riders passed somewhere beyond the trees. Then, just as he thought the danger had gone, his old hunting dog at the door lifted its head, growled low, and stared into the dark. Someone had stopped outside the hut. He reached for the hatchet. Near the hearth, but the orc girl was faster. Even wounded, she had the knife out and angled toward the door before he took 2 steps. Her breathing turned sharp with pain, but she did not lower the blade. For one tense moment, the tiny hut felt too small for either of them. Then came a soft scratch at the wood. Not a soldier, not an enemy, just his old dog circling back after catching some smell in the dark. The human let out a breath he had been holding so long it hurt. The orc did not. She stayed rigid until he opened the door a crack, let the grey-muzzled animal slip inside, and barred it again. Only then did she sag slightly against the bed frame. "You waste fear badly," she muttered. He glanced at her. "I could say the same." That almost sounded like the edge of a laugh from her, but it vanished before he could. "Be sure." The night turned colder. Wind pushed at the walls. He fed more wood to the fire, then knelt beside her again with a bowl of hot water, crushed herbs, and a needle he had heated in the flame. She watched every movement. "You know this work?" she asked. "Enough to keep sheep alive." "Sometimes, people. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." She studied him as if deciding whether he was foolish or honest. Maybe both. But this time, when he touched the wound near her ribs, she did not grab his wrist. Her jaw tightened. That was all. He cleaned the blood properly, pulled the torn flesh together as best he could, and wrapped her side with fresh strips of cloth. The arrow wound in her shoulder was worse around the edges, darkened in a way he did not like. Poison, most likely. Whoever had chased her had not wanted capture. They had wanted certainty. When he brought her broth, she looked into the bowl with open disapproval. "This is food." "It was, before you insulted it. It smells weak." He sat on the stool across from her and took a sip from his own bowl. "That is because I am poor." She stared at him, then at the broth again. Hunger beat pride. She drank. After a few swallows, she frowned. "Too much water." "It feeds too. In my people's camps, this would be given to children. In mine, children would be glad to get it." That quieted her. A strange silence settled after that, not friendly, not easy, but less sharp than before. Firelight moved over the hut walls, over his patched tools, over her torn armor laid out near the hearth to dry. Up close, he could see even more details now. Small silver studs hammered into the leather, braided binding on the shoulder plates. A crest worked so carefully into the metal that it had to mean status. Not common rank, not even close. She noticed where he was looking and turned her armor piece over with one heavy hand. "You ask many questions with your eyes," she said, "and you hide many answers with yours." For the first time, she looked at him fully, not as a human in the room, but as the man speaking back to her. Her gaze was heavy, proud, difficult to hold, yet something in it had changed. Curiosity, maybe, or surprise that he had not bent beneath it. The next morning he woke before dawn and found her trying to stand. She had one hand on the wall, the other pressed to her ribs, fury all over her face because her own body had betrayed her. He crossed the room quickly, expecting another threat, but when she swayed, she caught his shoulder instead of reaching for a weapon. The weight of her nearly drove him to one knee. Still he held. "You should be in bed," he said. "I have been in bed," she snapped. "I dislike it. That makes two of us." He helped her take 3 slow steps toward the fire. 3 steps felt like a victory neither of them wanted to admit. When she finally sat, breathing harder than she liked, he turned away and pretended not to notice. That small mercy seemed to matter. Later, while he chopped roots and stale turnip for the evening pot, she watched him work with narrowed eyes. "You live alone," she said. "Yes. No mate, no kin. No warriors near enough to answer if you shout." "No." She looked around the hut again, at the patched roof, at the split handles he had repaired instead of replacing, at the neat stack of firewood cut to exact lengths, at the single cup on the table. "In my world," she said slowly, "a male alone is either dangerous or already forgotten." He kept cutting. "In mine, sometimes both." That answer sat between them for a long time. By the 3rd night, the fever broke. He had fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed, one elbow on his knee, fingers still stained green from herbs. The fire had burned low. Rain tapped softly on the roof. When she woke clear-headed for the first time, she found him there, exhausted, chin against his chest, as if he had kept watch until sleep stole him by force. She stared at him in silence. This weak, poor human with the leaking roof and thin soup had hidden her, stitched her wounds, fed her from almost nothing, and never once asked what reward her life might bring him. Carefully, almost awkwardly, she reached for the old blanket hanging near the bed and pulled it over his shoulders. By morning, She had already turned her face away and rebuilt the wall, in her expression. But when he handed her breakfast, she took it without insult, and outside, near the tree line, he found fresh boot prints in the mud. He covered the boot prints with a pine branch, then stood very still in the cold morning air. One set, deep heel marks, fresh enough that the mud still held a wet shine. Someone had come close to the hut during the night and left without knocking. When he stepped back inside, the orc girl was sitting near the hearth with his old blanket folded beside her, as if she had never touched it. Her face was calm, but her eyes went to his boots at once, then to the door, then back to him. "You saw something," she said. He set down the water bucket. "Someone came near the house." Her jaw hardened. "How many?" "One." "That means more are not far." He hated how quickly the little peace in the room vanished. For 3 days the hut had started to feel less like a hiding place and more like a strange, fragile life built between two wounded people. Now danger had found the path again. He barred the door tighter, checked the window cloth, and moved his tools away from easy reach in case anyone forced their way in. She watched him in silence, then said, "You should send me away." He looked at her. "You can barely cross the room. That is my problem. It becomes mine when you bleed on my floor." She gave him a sharp look, then surprisingly lowered her eyes. "You joke when afraid. I work when afraid. Joking is cheaper." That time the laugh was real, though small and rough from disuse. It changed her face in a way that made him look away too fast. The day passed under tension. He did not go to the village. That alone was dangerous. People noticed absence faster than presence. He usually sold chopped wood, repaired handles, traded skins, or picked up salt once every few days. If he disappeared too long, someone would ask why. She seemed to understand that without being told. Near midday, while he was grinding herbs at the table, she spoke without looking at him. "The men who hunt me are not all strangers." His hand slowed on the mortar. "One of the arrows," she said. "The black fletching. It belongs to my own clan." He lifted his eyes, so that was the wound beneath the wound. "Your people did this?" "Some of them." Her mouth turned bitter. "When power shifts, loyalty becomes a costume, easy to wear, easy to remove." He said nothing for a moment. "That is true among humans too." She glanced at him. "Who removed theirs from you?" He almost smiled at how direct she was. Orcs, he was learning, did not circle pain politely. They stepped on it and waited to see if it bit. He set the mortar aside. "No one important enough for a song." Still, he leaned back in the chair, staring at the knife marks in his old table. "My father owed money before he died. My brothers left to marry better lives. I stayed with the debt, the hut, the tools, and a mother who did not live long enough to see any of it improve." He shrugged once. "After that, people mostly remembered me when something broke." Her gaze stayed on him, heavy and unreadable. "That is why you helped me," she said quietly. "You know what it is to be left behind." He wanted to deny it, could not. The silence after that was different, not awkward, not sharp. It carried the weight of something shared. Toward evening, she asked him to bring her armor. He hesitated, then set the damaged pieces beside her. She ran her fingers over the cracked shoulder plate and the dented chest guard with an expression he had not seen before. "Not pride, grief. This was made for me when I took my first command," she said. "I hated it." He blinked. "Why?" "Too polished, too ceremonial, too heavy with meaning." Her thumb paused over the silver crest. "Everyone looked at it before they looked at me." That line stayed in the room like smoke. He understood it too well. Carefully he picked up one broken leather strap and his awl. "It can be repaired." She watched him thread the leather. "You mend everything. Only the things that stay still long enough." For once, she did not answer with sharpness. She only studied his hands as they worked. Strong hands, not In the way warriors boast about, but in the quieter way of men who hold broken things together because no one else will. Night came hard and windy. The hut creaked. The dog would not settle. Then, just after dark, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent. 3 slow knocks. Both of them froze. The human stood first, but she was already on her feet behind him despite the pain, one hand braced against the wall, the other holding her knife. He reached for the hatchet. The fire cracked softly. Behind them. Then a voice came through the wood. "Open up," called a man from the village. "I saw smoke twice today. Thought I'd check whether you were hiding company." The human's blood went cold, because the man outside was not stupid, and the orc girl, standing only a few feet behind him in the dark, had just drawn enough breath to kill. The human did not open the door. He stood with one hand on the latch and said as evenly as he could, "I'm busy." The villager outside gave a short laugh. At night? Behind him, the orc girl shifted her grip on the knife. He could feel the tension in the room like a drawn rope. If the man outside pushed his way in, blood would hit the floor before a second sentence was spoken, so the human did the only thing he could think of. He coughed hard, rough and ugly, then kicked over the water bucket so it splashed loud across the floorboards. "Fever," he called through the door. "Been vomiting since morning. Come closer if you want the same." Silence. Then the man outside muttered a curse and stepped back. "You should have said that first." Boots moved away from the hut. Not fast enough, not far enough. The human waited until even the dog stopped growling before he eased his hand off the latch. When he turned around, the orc girl was still standing there, pale with strain, but looking at him as if she had never seen him clearly until that moment. "You lied well," she said. "I'm poor, not stupid." Her mouth twitched, but the look in her eyes did not soften. It darkened. "They will come back," she said. "And next time, not alone." He already knew that. The villager would talk. Men always talked harder when fear made them feel useful. By morning, half the village might know smoke had risen twice from the hut and that the lonely trapper on the edge of the woods had refused to open his door. He stared at her. "Then tell me what is happening." She said nothing. His voice sharpened. "No more half-truths, no more scraps. If I'm risking my neck, I deserve the whole blade." For a long moment she only looked at the fire. Then she straightened, though pain flashed over her face, and said, "My name is not the one I gave you." He waited. She lifted her chin with the hard pride of someone stepping back into chains she had once worn like armor. "I am Varka of the Iron Vale, firstborn of High Chieftain Orzath, war leader of the Black Crest, heir to the Eastern clans." The words hit him harder than any shout. He knew that name. Everyone near the border knew it. Varka of the Iron Vale was not just noble. She was the kind of name mothers used to frighten children into obedience. The clans under her father controlled mountain passes, iron roots, and enough warriors to burn 3 human towns before winter. Traders spoke of her like a storm wearing armor. Some said she had led raids by 18. Some said kings sent envoys with trembling hands when her banners crossed the ridge, and she'd been sleeping in his bed. He actually stepped back, not because she moved toward him, because the truth did. "You—" He let out a stunned breath. "You let me talk to you. Like I was only a wounded woman," she finished quietly. He laughed once, without humor. "Were you?" Something flickered in her face then. Hurt, real hurt, but he was not ready to be merciful. "You watched me patch your wounds with torn shirts and boiled roots while I thought you were some hunted soldier." His voice rose. "Do you know what happens if people find out who I hid here? They won't call me brave. They'll call me traitor, spy, fool." "I know." "No," he snapped. "You know what danger looks like when it wears armor and has a title. You don't know this kind. The small kind. The kind that ruins a man's whole life without ever drawing blood." That landed. He saw it land. Varka looked away for the first time since he had met her. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. I was returning from a summit under truce. 3 clan chiefs had been called to settle succession rights after my father fell ill. One of them sent assassins instead, her hand pressed against the bandage at her ribs. The poison was meant to finish what the arrows began. If I died before dawn, another bloodline could claim command of the eastern hosts before the clans. Learn the truth. And the black-fletched arrow, one of my own captains. Her expression hardened into something colder than anger. Bought or promised something greater. He stared at her. So that was it. Not random pursuit. Not border violence. A struggle for power large enough to crush villages just by shifting its weight. And he had dragged that struggle into his hut with muddy boots and bleeding hands. Before he could speak again, the dog exploded into barking. This time it was not. One man outside, he heard horses. Many. Then came the sound that made Varka go completely still, a deep war horn rolling through the trees. Not human, orc. A second later, torches flared beyond the window cloth, turning the hut walls orange. Voices rose outside, some human, some not. And then a man shouted from the dark, "In the name of the Black Crest, surrender the chieftain's daughter." The human looked at Varka. Varka looked at the door. And in that terrible breath between hiding and war, he realized the hunters had not come for a fugitive. They had come for a crown. The next seconds moved fast enough to break thought. A heavy fist slammed against the door. Someone outside shouted in the orc tongue. Another voice answered from farther back in human speech, offering silver for betrayal. That was the ugliest part. Both sides were already trying to buy the room before they had even entered it. The human tightened his grip on the hatchet. Varka stepped in front of him, even wounded, even pale from blood loss. She seemed to grow larger as she drew herself up. Not because her body changed, but because the truth had fully returned to it. This was not the hunted stranger from his bed. This was the woman armies obeyed. "You must leave through the back," she said. He stared at her. "And let them take you? They may take me alive. They will not spare you." Another blow hit the door. Wood cracked. He looked toward the rear wall, toward the life he might still save if he ran now. His tools, his hut, his own name, perhaps. Then he looked back at her and saw something he had not expected, on the face of someone so feared, not command. Grief. "They will drag you into clan war because of me," she said, lower now. "If you stay, you lose your human life. If you go, you may still keep what remains of it." He laughed once, bitter and breathless. "You say that like there's much left to keep." That struck her deeper than anger had. Outside the voices rose. Orc steel rang against the latch. Human boots circled the hut like wolves waiting for weakness. Then Varka did something he never could have imagined. She dropped her knife. It hit the floorboards between them. And before the next strike landed on the door, she lowered herself to one knee. For a moment he just stared, unable to understand what he was seeing. A chieftain's daughter, a war leader, kneeling in his broken hut with torchlight burning through the walls. "In my people's law," she said, voice steady despite the chaos outside, "a warrior kneels only to a grave, a god, or the One. They choose above pride." His mouth went dry. She lifted her eyes to his. "I have command land, banners, and enemies enough to bury 10 lives. I have a hall of stone, warriors sworn to my name, and a place in the Iron Vale no human has ever been offered." Her voice roughened, not with weakness this time, but with truth forced open. "Take it. Take all of it. Not as servant, not as pet, not as hidden kindness I leave behind in a forest hut." The door splintered again. "Come with me," she said. "Stand beside me, under my protection, under my name if you wish, or with a place of your own if you do not. I will give you land, safety, fire that never runs out, and a future no one can strip from you in the dark." Her next breath shook. "And if the word must be said plain, then hear it plain. I ask for marriage." For one heartbeat, the whole world seemed to go silent. He should have answered at once. Any fool listening to the words without the weight behind them would have thought the choice easy. A poor human offered everything by a powerful woman: protection, status, a place. But all he felt at first was fear, not of her, of vanishing inside her world, of being the weak thing people laughed at behind raised cups, of standing in halls built for giants and forever being the outsider she had chosen against reason, of waking one day and realizing he had traded his lonely life for one where he belonged nowhere at all. "You don't know what you're asking," he said. Varka rose slowly, pain flashing across her face, but she did not hide from him now. "I know exactly what I am asking. You are asking me to leave everything I understand. Yes. To enter a place where your enemies will use me against you. Yes. To trust that your people will ever see me as more than a curiosity." At that, something fierce entered her gaze. "No," she said, "I am asking you to trust me." The words hit harder than the title. The land, the promise of safety. Another crash shook the hut. The bar split. Cold air pushed through the widening seam of the door. He looked around his home one last time. The patched roof, the crooked table, the fire he had fed alone, everything small, everything surviving. Everything that had kept him alive, but never once made him feel chosen. Then he looked at Varka, at the woman who had seen his poverty, his silence, his fear, and had not mistaken any of it for worthlessness. He stepped forward. When the door burst inward and torchlight flooded the hut, the first thing both humans and orcs saw was not a prisoner, not a fugitive, not a trapper trying to beg for mercy. They saw the human take Varka's hand and say, with his voice shaking but unbroken, "Then let them hear me beside you." What followed cost them both more than either had spoken aloud that night. The men from the village stepped back first, not out of kindness, out of fear. Because once the human stood beside Varka instead of behind her, the room changed shape. The orcs outside no longer saw a wounded fugitive cornered in a hut. They saw their chieftain's daughter standing with a witness, and more dangerously, with a chosen man. That made every next move political, public, permanent. The human villagers who had come for silver and suspicion suddenly wanted no part in being crushed between clan law and border blood. They scattered fast, taking their greed with them. But the orcs did not. Varka's loyal warriors entered armed and grim, and with them came the truth in full. Her father had not simply fallen ill, he had been slowly poisoned. The summit had been a trap. The captain who turned on her had already joined a rival bloodline and was preparing to claim the eastern war banners before dawn. So Varka did what wounded hearts and wounded rulers are forced to do. She stood, not as the hunted woman from the trap, not as the half-healed stranger by the fire. She stood as heir to the Iron Veil, and named the traitors before her own warriors. The human remained at her side while she did it. That alone was enough to shock hardened orc captains into silence. The fight that followed was not won in the hut, but it was decided there, because Varka did not return, hidden, broken, or carried. She returned, witnessed, and the witness was a poor human man who had nothing to gain when he saved her and everything to lose when he chose her openly. That mattered, more than titles expected, more than rivals understood. The captain who betrayed her was exposed within 2 days. The poison used on Varka matched what had been used on her father. The rival bloodline lost its claim, not only because Varka survived, but because too many had now seen what her enemies feared most. She could inspire loyalty, even when stripped of armor, rank, and power. Their choice still had a cost. The human could never return to his old life. His hut at the forest's edge was burned by frightened villagers before the month was over. No one was killed, but the message was clear. He no longer belonged to the world that had once ignored him. That hurt more than he expected. A man can survive loneliness so long, he mistakes it for home. Varka paid too, Two elder chiefs refused her marriage claim at first. Some called her reckless, some called her bewitched by weakness. One called her dishonored to her face and left with half his warriors. She let him go. Power built only on fear had nearly killed her. She would not rebuild her life from the same stone. Winter turned, then spring. The marriage was not held in secret. It took place at the edge of the Iron Veil, where the mountain path opened toward the human lands below, as if the world itself could not decide which of them it belonged to. Orc banners hung beside a simple wooden arch, the human carved with his own hands. No gold, no jeweled throne, just iron, pine, fire, and witnesses from both sides brave enough to come. Varka wore restored armor with one strap still stitched by his hand. He wore no crown, no borrowed grandeur, only clean, dark wool, steady shoulders, and the knife she had once held to his throat, now peace-bound at his belt in an orc marriage wrapping. When the vows ended, she did not tower above him like a ruler above a subject. She bowed her head to rest her forehead gently against his. The same woman who had once bled in his trap. The same man who had once dragged her through mud to a leaking hut no one envied. Later, as dusk settled and the wedding fires burned low, they stood together looking out across the valley while rain began to fall, soft, steady, familiar. He reached for her hand first this time, and when she closed her larger hand around his, it no longer felt like the moment a powerful orc chose a poor human. It felt like the moment two people, both once trapped in lives that had never truly seen them, finally stopped surviving alone.